We are with Khachik Adumyan for our next episode of Hidden People. And Khachik, before we tell our viewers what it is that you do in Armenia, let's make a quick list of all the countries you've been to.
It would take too much of your time, I think.
I think you've been on every continent, probably?
I haven't been to Australia and South America. And the South Pole.
The South Pole, but you have been to...
I just added Asia to my list because I had to work in China for the summer edition of the Davos Economic Forum.
Okay.
There was an official delegation that I accompanied, but no, work usually takes me back to the same places, and it's mostly in Europe and the United States. Russia is rare.
Russia is rare.
Once. Okay. Africa, no. If I count North Africa, I've been there a few times.
Okay, well, I mean, if it's Egypt,
Tunisia,
Morocco,
yeah.
Well, it's still Africa.
But Africa proper, sub-Saharan was only once.
Okay. So, what is a young man who's another Gyumri?
That's true.
We've had a lot of guests on Hidden People who were born and raised in Gyumri. It's a very special city, I think, that produces very special people. So what is a young man like yourself, born and raised in Gyumri, doing in all these countries of the world, one might ask?
If I can talk about the city in just a few words.
Sure.
I do think it's a very special city, which is currently in very unfortunate circumstances, and those Gyumretis that will hear me that have been away for a while they probably have their sources of information, but what I want them to know is that the hopelessness has changed a little bit, but not nearly enough. Because when you talk to the people that are there, they still feel very strong hopelessness. And it is a very special city because, in a way, historically being the second city in Armenia, there was always this extra motivation to excel. And there were people that come from there always had a desire to come to the big city and be better at what they did. I wouldn't necessarily say that people of Gyumri have been supportive of each other. A lot of people from Gyumri that I know are self-made. They came here, they studied, and they stayed, and they succeeded. My story is very similar to that. I just ended up doing what I do now, not necessarily my line of education, but that was the livelihood I could make. And that was something that worked, and I ended up being an interpreter.
Right.
I always say that I am a self-taught interpreter without much formal education in what I do, and still probably need a lot more of learning in terms of the proper techniques. But
since you gave it away, the fact that you are an interpreter, and that's how we've met. I mean, for a number of years, we've collaborated in different events. You are one of the best known, the highest, most highly requested interpreters in Armenia. But it's self-taught, you said. How does that happen?
In my case, it takes a very good knowledge of English, which I learned in Gyumri from my English teacher, and I want to say her name. It's Anahit Ovanisyan. She taught me English, so the basic knowledge of English was good enough. What also helped me was that my high school education was mathematics specialization. Math
and languages have a very
apparently
close
they do.
Yeah.
Apparently I think they do, because when I was younger, my grandparents especially told me a lot that you will need math in everything in life that you do. And I was like, oh, come on,
really?
It's just the numbers, formula. Do I
know.
really need math? But I ended up doing a lot of math. But the symbolic thinking and the analysis, and synthesis, and the combining numbers or seeing the connections.
Structure of sentences, all of that. Yeah.
It's a lot of it is mathematical, I think. Of course, language requires many other things, which you need to develop as you go with practice. But yeah, the math education helped. The general political studies education also helped me a little bit. And then, and eventually practice. Practice is the only way to get perfect. And I've seen a lot of people with great theoretical education that lack practice.
Growing up, Khachik, you said you had also a political science background, international relations background, languages. Was this something that you thought you would end up doing with your life?
No. I wasn't ever thinking about that. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do at 19, which was when I just went to an anonymous language test for the American University of Armenia, and ended up getting picked to interpret for them. And it has
at 19?
it was 19 when I went to take the test, and at the same time also started working for the World Bank. Then being a small city, word gets around.
Sure,
people
word of
get
mouth
to know you.
really works in Yerevan, doesn't
Armenia.
it?
It's the best advertisement you can have.
One of the interesting things, I have to ask you about this. The whole country has been talking about what took place at PACE, at the Parliamentary Assembly's Council of Europe. So I was listening live to the sessions after President Serge Sarkisyan gave his speech, and then now the very infamous question by Zari Postandjan. But as I'm listening to Serge Sarkisyan's speech, I'm saying, I know that interpreter, I know that voice. I said, it's Khachik. What is Khachik doing in Strasbourg? So how do you end up being the interpreter in Strasbourg for President Serge Sarkisyan during his speech at PACE?
The European organizations in particular have a specific way of hiring.
Okay.
And in this particular case, I was working for the Council of Europe. So they would typically hire me from Armenia with some background knowledge, knowing I have worked for them before many times for many years. And so they have a list, they have a roster, and they just go by the roster. They call the people or email you, and then they hire you. And they're actually very good at giving you background materials. Of course, they didn't give me Zaruhi's question, and so that was a
that was a surprise.
I had to act impromptu, yeah. But no, that's a lot of the times when you go to interpret, you don't know what's going to come out.
You have to be on your feet.
You have to be on your feet, and you have to play it by the ear. And so the European organizations just hired me, and I ended up being there. And
you ended up being there. Okay, so now I'm listening to President Serge Sarkisyan speaking in Armenian, which I understand, but then of course having to listen to the interpretation, which is my friend Khachik. And then Zari Postandjan gets up and asks the president, if it's true that he had lost 70 million euros in European casinos. And without a beat, you're just translating. There's no sort of thing in your voice. I'm just thinking, you must have a lot of information.
If I can give you a general answer to that, because I don't really discuss the substance of what I translate, and I try to hold my political views to myself until the day I retire, and then I can really will burst out like a volcano. I think.
Can I interview you that day?
Sure. you have the exclusive priority right. Yeah, exclusive priority right. No, what happens in those meetings is that I get feedback from the audience. I solicit feedback from the audience. I wonder what they feel like. So I get people who hate it, that I put emotion in my voice, which is my natural ways. And I get people who say that's actually great. We don't fall asleep. We actually can follow and understand the speaker better. But it's a very fine balance. Again, you have to strike between maintaining neutrality, because your tone will sometimes add to your feelings and how you actually feel about something. And on the other hand, you have to maintain the speaker's tone and intonation and pitch and emphasis and all of that. And so maintaining that balance is quite hard too. And the other thing that complicated it for me, as Zaruhi got up to ask her question, the head of the interpretation service opened my door just to check on me. So she walked in and she stayed there. And
because she was hearing the question as it's being interpreted.
And she was coming in to check on me, and she just sat there. And so usually I would have been alone in the booth at that time, but then there was the chief interpreter sitting next to me and just listening to it. But again, you have to do your job. I mean, I view it as a profession. You have to be professional. It's like going to a dentist, and then he doesn't like your looks, so he's going to treat you worse or better, or you're just a professional, just like anyone else. And I am rather.
No, it's hard. It's hard. I know, because the other day, we have an English language news digest that I host also for CivilNet, and there was something. I don't want to say what it's about, but it was just about another country's statement by the leader of that country, which was quite ridiculous, and I really had a hard time.
Everyone knows what you're talking about.
Well, whatever, it's fine. So I had a really hard time, maintaining my composure. I think we had to do like 3 takes, because every time I was going to say what he said, I was like doing this, right? So I can imagine how difficult it must be for you to control.
I'll break a secret to you again without divulging names or content. Is the one thing I like to do and I hate to do is to interpret for certain people that lie in meetings bluntly. For example,
are you going to give us an example?
Here are these unaware, or to put it nicely, uninformed foreigners. So I can tell them anything I want. And so the one thing I used to do when I was younger, was watching people's lips. As they're sitting across the table, I would watch it and try to figure if this guy, how his face changes, because with all the facial muscles, something goes on. And you can almost observe how the mimics change. And the other thing that I don't like myself to do for is when I interpret someone and I don't like what they're saying.
I know.
But you still have to interpret what they're saying. And sometimes, by accident almost, the translation sounds better than the original. So you're doing the guy a favor inadvertently.
And you don't really
want to do it.
You don't want to do it.
But it's because of the language structure.
Yeah.
Sometimes the English will always sound better. Certain messages will be phrased better in English. Certain messages will be phrased better in Armenian.
So this person who you know is lying, who you know is not such a kosher person, and yet you're making him sound and look good, and
That's easy, which is part of your job.
Which is part of your job.
Well, actually, again, it's a balance. Do you actually make them sound as silly in the translation as they sound in the original? Do you maintain that level of bad language?
Okay, Khachik, how many years have you been doing this now?
Well, the first time I interpreted, and I had to interpret, I was put on the spot. I was 16, actually.
Okay.
So,
but professionally?
Professionally from 99.
So
14
years. Okay, I have to ask a question. In 14 years, what has been your biggest screw-up? You must have had a screw-up.
There are very few ones that I remember that are like big and major.
You can tell us. It's okay.
No, but there are times when you misspeak, when you confuse adultery with adulthood. That was an example I remember. I was talking about children reaching the age of adultery once, and I just confused the word, and I meant children reaching the age of adulthood. There have been times when you refer to certain people as Mr., although it's an obvious Mrs., and incidents happen all the time.
But these are good stories, to tell over some cocktails after a long day of translating.
once a French interpreter that wasn't my screw up, but I remembered it because I ended up laughing in the microphone because I didn't expect it. Was a French interpreter was relaying into English the title of the Antillias Catholicas, and the French interpreter said, translating from French to English, and I was picking it up to go into Armenian.
Oh my goodness, I can imagine.
The interpreter said, and now the floor is given to Aram II, the Catholicus, or the Patriarch of the Armenian Holy House of Sicily.
Are you kidding me?
Because in French it sounds pretty close.
Oh my, Sicily.
There you go. We have Cilicia, you could confuse those.
Armenia presents opportunities that sometimes are staring us in the face and we don't see them because, there's this sense of, like you said earlier in Gyumri, a sense of hopelessness that we feel. And yet I see people like you who are working, making a difference by your professionalism, which is something that's missing, I think, also in the workforce and the work ethic in Armenia. So just by serving with your own example, you bring a new quality. And of course, my thing is that you stay, obviously, and you have a 9-year-old daughter. She's going to school here. How do you see the future for her?
Now you touched a very sensitive point. First of all, being a professional and trying to make a change, yes. I mean, I try to get better in what I do. I always strive. I have that ambition to get better at what I do. And I'm not quite there yet. And I know that 10 years looking back, I will think that I was naive and incompetent in many ways, which is what I think of myself when I look back 10 years.
We all do.
Turning to the longer term horizon, that's really the biggest challenge, I think, for many of my friends, many people around me. When I think of whether Armenia is going to be significantly different or what it's going to be like in 10 years or 15 or 20 years, I don't know. It's uncertainty. It's not that there's a downside risk, but it's an uncertainty, which is marred by a lot of outside factors, which is marred by a lot of realities that often lie outside of our control, but many of them do lie within our control. But the pace of change at which those things are happening doesn't help me to understand where we're going to be in 10 years, or 15 years, or 20 years, at what's the most optimal scenario, if you will, in 20 years, what's the worst scenario in 20 years. The worst is pretty obvious, but the optimally, we could, I'm still hopeful. I'm optimistic about the future, but I don't see how that breakthrough is going to happen, how as a society we're going to change. Now again, there are a lot of hopeful signs in just the last 5 years that weren't there 5 years ago. That absolutely, I mean, technology is changing everything, young people are changing everything. and it will probably get there. I don't know. It's like it's almost like if you detach yourself from the picture and watch it from outside, it's like watching a long movie where you don't know what's going to happen at the end.
You don't know the ending.
It's work in process, you know.
That's a good way to, I think, end this episode of Hidden People. That Armenia is a work in progress, and we are the characters in the movie, sort of floating along, and we'll see where we end up.
If I can just say, I'm not even a character in the movie. I'm a guy from behind the glass, watching, helping the people in there, and the foreigners that come every once in a while to better understand each other.
Well, that's a very important role that you've taken on. Thank you very much, Khachik Adumyan, for spending, I know you're a very busy schedule, for spending a couple of minutes with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.